let's talk about abandonware. Also known as orphan works, we're talking about software that's no longer officially supported. And usually when people talk about abandonware, they're talking about Windows XP, Internet Explorer, Adobe Photoshop CS2, which I still use, stuff like that. It's less common to hear of games becoming abandonware since they don't get upgraded in the same way that operating systems and softwares do. Usually someone wants to play the game and someone is always selling a copy. But despite that, both of the PokerNite games have fallen victim to abandonment. They're no longer sold, distributed, or updated by anyone, excepting the remaining Steam keys, whilst other orphaned IPs from Telltale's backlog have been reacquired by various different companies. PokerNite remains the odd one out. Now, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm probably going to miss some details, but to quickly clear up how the Telltale model works for those confused, when Telltale makes a game involving an intellectual property they did not create, they have to get permission from the rights holders of that property to make said game. They'll draw up a contract stipulating how much money the rights holder earns from the game and how much Telltale earns. Sometimes rights holders might charge for their appearances as well, particularly those more well-known IPs with good financial backing. These contracts don't last forever, and are usually renewed every 5 years or so, although sometimes license agreements might last quite a bit longer. And if the rights holders want new, more expensive terms, or if the studio can't afford to pay for the IP again and make a profit, then the license expires, and selling the game commercially becomes illegal. This model ended up being a huge problem for Telltale in the long run, despite it being very lucrative initially. Pretty much all of their games, definitely all of their renowned works at least, were kept in the hands of others. PokerNite 2's license expired before the company even shut down, which was a sure enough sign to investors that TTG was struggling to keep afloat. It's no surprise though, yet AAA characters, they'll cost AAA prices. It's the unfortunate inevitable outcome of a system that otherwise brought us some revolutionary games throughout the 2010s. So now that we're all on the same page, what's the problem? Why talk about abandonware at all here? Well, usually, abandonware games aren't that big of a deal. Most of the internet seemingly agrees it's okay to pirate a game that isn't being officially distributed anymore. If the publisher isn't making any money off of it, the broad consensus is that it's a victimless crime, and it's not exactly a law that's being enforced with harsh rigor.
And the cops aren't going to break down your door and put a gun to your head for pirating a game that the company is literally not even selling anymore. Don't sell crack out of your house though, because they will break down your door for that.
There are some particularly noteworthy exceptions to this. Not all abandonware is so innocent, particularly games as a service, or GAS as it's often abbreviated. Games which will essentially die once official support is pulled, since they require a continuous connection to a server to function. For more on that, I direct you all to Ross Scott, who has a great video on why this business practice is, at the very least, highly unethical, and why digital ownership is so important. PokerNite The Inventory is not a GAS game, I should clarify, since it does not require continuous connection to a server in order to be played. Instead, it occupies this very odd middle ground between your usual forms of abandonware and being server dependent. The full experience can still be enjoyed without purchasing anything, not even an old Steam key. You can download both games from the Internet Archive, although this is a bit of a legal grey area. Again though, nobody's going to hunt you down for playing them. The only people who would, the old Telltale staff, have since dispersed into other parts of the video game industry. They probably don't care. However, this is not what most people want. As we all know, both PokerNite games are highly sought after because they have exclusive Steam items attached to their achievements, for both TF2 and later Borderlands 2. You need access to a copy of the Steam version in order to get these. This is connected to a central server, and always will be, but supplies are running thin. As the well of Steam keys has dried up over time, both games have become inordinately expensive on resale. Despite having retailed for just $5 initially, the G2A prices keep spiraling and spiraling. Prices just get higher. I mentioned, briefly, in my first video that these could just be straight up scams. I also mentioned that a sort of sub-community has spawned out of this Steam family share economy, where people pay a few TF2 keys for access to a library with the game. This lets the sharee earn the achievements, and as a result, the items. I failed to mention in that video, and I really wish I had done my research here, just how unsafe this method is as well. The actual act of family sharing is fine. If you have a friend and they're offering, go for it. But be very, very cautious when trying to trade keys for PokerNite access on the Steam forums, or anywhere else. Again, there's no guarantee you're going to be given sharing privileges, and if anything goes wrong, Steam support is not obligated to help you out. Welcome to the weird world of PokerNite scams.
Scammers. There are profiles on here pretending to give access to PokerNite and will try to trick you by any means necessary to get something out of you before you get their account.
Sharing PokerNite 2 for 2 TF key. Add me if you are interested. My profile plus reps.
You don't even have the game?
I have it in my secondary account.
I bought it today. Amazing how rare this game has become. I got scammed twice. First, almost got my entire PC by malware. Second, Lay Happy Merchant gave me a Steam key costing me $7, which instead gave me a crappy indie game that costs less than $1.
Many outsiders might say that this is just not that serious. Indeed, it's far from the biggest injustice in the world. It's pretty far from even being the biggest injustice in gaming, but it's still relevant because when people aren't getting scammed, they're still waiting ages to find reputable vendors, and so there's some sort of problem to solve here. It raises the question, whose responsibility is it to solve this, if anyone's? Does the duty of justice in this case potentially fall on Valve rather than Telltale, since it was partially their decision at least to put these items in the game, and since they're still redeemable, on their platform no less, and since the company hasn't undergone any major liquidations where all of the old staff left, they're the closest surviving entity responsible for this, and they probably ought to do something about it. But it's quite easy to argue against this position. Valve themselves don't own the inventory as a brand, so the courses of action they can legitimately take to curtail the scamming are not really desirable. They could remove the achievements and allow no more of the items into circulation, but that locks out a lot of people who are otherwise freely and safely sharing the game. They could also provide a new, cheaper means to unlock the items, but that appears unfair to people who have paid by the boatload to actually own the game now. But what about the rebooted Telltale, owned by LCG Entertainment? They still own the inventory as a property, presumably, so it's now their franchise, and they ought to do something about the scams, but what can they actually do? Again, even if you think it's their problem to solve, it would be a real struggle for them to relicense Poker 2 given its expensive franchises. Even for the original though, there's little hope. It's clear that LCG and Homestar Runner have little interest in working with each other, as they chose not to renew the license for Strongbad's Cool Game for Attractive People relatively recently. That first poker title that they did was about the old connections that the old staff made. The new owners are basically disconnected from that. So if there literally can't be a practical onus on either of these companies, what else can even be done? Well, fortunately, there's always charity. If you're a fan of these games and you know someone else who wants the items, even if they just want the items and don't even want to play the game properly, do them a favour anyway, and Steam share it out for free. Just like many of us did on our first few playthroughs, hopefully your friend will soon realise what a lost gem this title is. The further the spread, the more posthumous fans there are for the franchise, meaning a higher possibility of a spiritual successor making the rounds in the future. And remember, if you just want to play them and don't care for any Steam achievements, you can just get yourself onto the Internet Archive. This isn't a game that people are keeping you from playing, it's merely the victim of a complicated agreement. It's likely that nobody's going to chase you down for playing this because nobody's really actively enforcing the rights on this anymore. But maybe one day, that might change.
It's okay to be jealous of my style.
I'll keep that in mind.